This is You're Probably Right. Entertainment first, everything else is just bonus. Opinions, all ours. Sometimes backed by research, but never the final word. There are always exceptions, so take it with a grain of salt and a slight dusting of chili powder. If something in this episode resonates with you or you want to reach out directly, you can email the show at yprpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find the podcast on Facebook. Just search You're Probably Right podcast and the page should come up. And if you are listening somewhere other than Spotify, you can find the show there as well. Just search You're Probably Right and follow the podcast so new episodes show up automatically. All right, let's get into it.
Hey, what's up, y'all? This is MCM, and you are listening to You're Probably Right podcast. This is episode 312. Just a little bit about the podcast, as some of you know. It's been around since 2021. First episode's probably, I would say, 2015, and all are welcome. Remember, I am a Christian, so most of my beliefs, most of the things I say are underneath that umbrella, I guess is the best thing to say. But at the same time, it's not a Christian podcast. It's just a podcast by a Bible-believing Christian. And but again, most of these thoughts are just my thoughts. Remember, every episode of this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. I don't really say names. Well, I did say names of my family members a long time ago, but I mean, you'd have to really search through 312 episodes to find it. But I mean, doesn't really matter. Anyhow, I'm just going to start it off. I'm happy that you are here. Please share the podcast. It might help somebody, might give somebody a few laughs, might make some people cry, but hopefully it'll entertain and do some other stuff, hopefully. So without further ado, let's start it. There is something uniquely destabilizing about realizing you are single before anyone officially tells you that you're single. No fight, no formal ending, no speech, just absence. Just the gradual understanding that the connection you thought was alive is no longer breathing. It does not die in front of you, really. It fades behind you. And you notice it only when you turn around and feel the space. That's where I am. Not freshly rejected, not dramatically abandoned, just slowly accepting that the energy I thought was mutual is no longer returning to me. And maybe never was at the depth that I thought or believed. That realization does not explode. It settles. It settles in the chest, in the stomach, in the quiet moments when your phone doesn't light up, in the quiet moments maybe when you're walking your dog or at the dog park, or just taking a drive to the mall, not because you need something, but you're driving to the mall. It settles in the gap between what used to happen and what's happening now. And what is happening now is simple. Silence. In this case, 6 days of it. 6 days where nothing stopped her from reaching out. Or him. 6 days where I was injured. Not theoretically injured. Not attention seeking. Injured. Just legitimately unable to function the way I normally do. And still, nothing. And the absence of something that once excited me and them, something that existed loudly forces you to confront something ugly. You start asking yourself whether you imagine the depth. Because I remember days when my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. I remember nights of intense conversations. I remember vulnerability. I remember softness. I remember being looked at in a way that felt like I'd been chosen. And now I'm looking at the same screen, wondering if I was simply convenient. That's right, I'm drinking coffee, guys. It is a very different feeling to be wanted in the moment than to be chosen for the future. And I am starting to see that I may have confused those two things. There is a specific humiliation in recognizing that you felt more. Not because feeling more is weakness, but because it exposes asymmetry. And asymmetry is hard on the ego. It forces you to admit that your emotional investment was heavier, that yes, your emotions might have just run away with you, that your interpretation of meaning was larger, that your internal narrative,
If this sounds familiar, follow the show so this kind of thinking stays close.
that your internal narrative ran further ahead than reality. And it makes you question yourself. Was I projecting? Was I hoping too much? Was I filling in blanks that were never promised? But then I stop because I know what I experienced. I know the intimacy. I know the closeness. I know the confessions. I know even the physical bond. That was real. It wasn't fabricated in my head. The problem is not that it was unreal. The problem is that it did not anchor. It did not solidify. It did not move from intensity into commitment. It hovered. And hovering is seductive. However, well, hovering keeps hope alive, as someone once said. Hovering keeps interpretation flexible. Hovering keeps you emotionally invested because nothing is fully confirmed and nothing is fully denied. It's a gray zone that certainly exhausts you. And now that gray zone is thinning because silence clarifies. Silence is brutal because it does not argue, it does nothing. It simply sits there. And you can either keep creating explanations of or softening it for yourself, or you can let it speak. If someone feels urgency towards you, they move towards you. If they do not, they do not. That sentence sounds simple, but it slices because it removes all the elaborate stories I might want to construct for myself, the bedtime stories I have to tell myself to fall asleep. Busy, distracted, overwhelmed, confused, broken. None of those stop someone from sending one message. And so I sit here confronting the possibility that I was meaningful, but not essential, that I was valued, but not prioritized, that I was wanted in moments, but not chosen long term. That is where the fear begins to spread. Because this is not just about one woman, or for a woman, one man. That's why I said that earlier, by the way. It never is. It's about pattern. It's about a pattern. It's about the part of me that leans in fully, the part of me that gives, the part of me that anticipates need, the part of me that tries to be the steady one. You see, I've always been that way. I don't love halfway. I don't invest halfway. I don't protect halfway. When I care loudly, in action, even if I'm quiet in words. I show up. I provide. I help. I listen. I support. I fix. I never once did those things because I thought they guaranteed permanence. But if I am honest, there is a small part of me that believed consistency would be rewarded with consistency. Am I wrong? You see, that depth would be met with depth, I thought. That showing up repeatedly would anchor something. But desire does not operate in fairness. You see, desire is not transactional. Just because you gave doesn't mean you're going to get back. Desire. You can't gift your way into being chosen. You cannot overperform your way into permanence. You can't prove your way into indispensability. And the older I get, the more that truth becomes less theoretical and more personal. There is something about reaching this stage of life and realizing you are still capable of bonding deeply, still capable of intensity, still capable of hope, and yet still vulnerable to being optional. And that, my friends, is sobering. Because youth carries built in optimism. You know, you run fast, you jump high, you fall down, you bounce back up. You see, when you're younger, you tell yourself there are endless chapters. You assume misalignment is temporary. You believe you have time to recalibrate, change your hair, cut your hair, dye your hair, because you still have hair. But here we are. Now, the chapters feel heavier now, right? Now the stakes feel sharper. Now the questions become quieter and more dangerous. And many more times can I open, how many more times, sorry, can I open a full and fully accept the possibility that I will not be kept? I mean, everybody has skeletons in their closet, right? And every once in a while, you think you find someone that you can let a couple of those skeletons out and let the chips fall where they may. And every time you do that and they don't land well, you want to hide some of those mishaps, misgivings, missteps. misunderstandings. And underneath that question is something even more uncomfortable. What if I'm easier to replace than I am than I want to believe? Not because I lack value, but because value does not automatically create attachment. You can be kind, you can be stable, you can be emotionally intelligent, you can be loyal, you can even be gainfully employed, as they say. What's that these days? And still not be the person someone rearranges their life for. That is a different kind of wound. You see, it's not a wound to your confidence, it's a wound to your sense of significance. And significance is tied to identity. We all want to matter in someone's rhythm, not as an accessory, not as an option, not as comfort, not necessarily only as a provider, but as a priority, even if you are a provider. And when you realize your absence does not disrupt someone's pattern, you are forced to confront that you may not have occupied the space that you thought you did. That realization does not make me angry, it makes me still. It makes me reflective. It makes me go through old text messages. It makes me look at old pictures. It makes me ponder. It makes me wonder. And sometimes it makes me, it makes me look backward at moments I once romanticized and asked myself whether I read trajectory in chemistry, whether I mistook intensity for inevitability, whether I assumed physical closeness translated into emotional direction. You see, in life, many of you have gone through this, I'm sure, or going through this. Sex can feel like confirmation, right? For some. You see, and for those of you who don't believe that that should even happen outside of marriage, well, guess what? I agree with you. But for those of you who have partaken in this, but still have the old school mentality about it, thinking that, well, maybe you were married and, you tried to get into relationship and maybe that became a part of it and you didn't really agree that that's the way you should be living your life. But then, of course, you were worried that if you got yourself into another marriage and you waited for that, well, you have your own stories, I'm sure, surrounding it. But for those of us who still have those old school values, we take that a lot of the time, and I'm talking about sex, of course, as confirmation that this is going to the proper area and in the proper direction. It's different now, though. You see, intimacy can feel like alignment for many of us, but physical depth does not guarantee relational future. Surprise. That is a lesson I am learning slowly and reluctantly. And I hate that I have to learn it at this stage of my life. Yeah, some people really are just in it for a roll in the hay or whatever. Because, you see, I don't want to become guarded in that way. I don't want to become cynical. I do not want to harden. But there is something in me that feels exposed right now. And I'm sure many of you have possibly felt this as well. Exposed in the sense that I invested emotionally in something that did not invest back at the same weight, in the same way, with the same effort. And sometimes we have the same effort and maybe we can't push or lift the same amount of weight, but the effort can't be denied. And that exposure touches older layers. It touches a part of me that learned early on that being useful could reduce abandonment. So I thought, right? That giving could create security. That's why you gave your lunch to the bully, right? Or your lunch money or your milk money. That overtech sorry, that overextending could prevent loss. As a child, you do not think in those terms. You simply learn what keeps you safe. And if being generous reduces threat, you keep being generous, obviously. If being accommodating reduces tension, you keep accommodating. If being steady prevents chaos, you keep being steady. But adult intimacy does not operate on childhood survival strategies. Adult intimacy requires mutual desire, and desire is not something you can engineer. That is the part that terrifies me, and I'm sure many of you, a little. Because if I cannot engineer desire through consistency, generosity, loyalty, then am I left with vulnerability? Pure, unadulterated, imagine, vulnerability. The kind that says, I can offer this fully, but I cannot control whether it is chosen. The lack of control is definitely destabilizing because I have always been someone who shows up. I can't control someone else's heart. I can't control someone else's urgency, and I cannot make myself unforgettable unless you do some crazy unforgettable stuff. And then you just become a joke. So you either are or you're not. And if you're not, the only thing left is acceptance. But am I not? But I'm not at acceptance yet, I guess. I think I'm in the middle. And I am in the space where hope flickers and fades in the same day. I wake up strong some mornings, clear, certain, and think, I see it now. I understand. I accept. Then a memory shows up. Maybe I flick past an old text. Look at a picture, a greeting card, words of affirmation in a text or something. Then a memory shows up in its softness. Maybe it's a laugh. Maybe it's a audio message, audio text, or whatever they call it these days. A moment of closeness. And something in me wonders if I gave up too soon. Yeah. Spin me right round, baby, right round, like a record, baby. That back and forth is exhausting. It's not dramatic, it's just mentally draining because the brain wants resolution, the heart wants certainty, and silence gives none of those things. It simply reflects. And what it reflects right now is this: I cared more. The sentence is not self pity, It is not accusation, it's an observation. And observing that hurts. There's another layer under the fear of being replaceable, and it's quieter and it's heavier, less dramatic. It's the fear of being too late. When you're young and something fades, you tell yourself, there's another time. There is time. Time to reinvent yourself, time to meet someone new, time to recover from the pain, time to stumble into something better. Time feels so abundant, and now it feels measured. Now, when something dissolves, it doesn't just sting emotionally, it triggers arithmetic or arithmetic. Arithmetic. Imagine. Arithmetic. How many more chances, right? You start adding everything up. How many more intense beginnings that never become permanence? How many more people do I have the energy to open myself up to like that? I thought that was the one, just like I thought the one before that one was the one. There's a kind of fatigue that sets in when you realize you can bond deeply, physically, emotionally, intellectually, comically, and still end up back at zero. Zero isn't dramatic, zero is quiet. Zero is waking up and realizing your phone is silent. Zero is knowing someone else is continuing their life uninterrupted. Zero is accepting that your absence doesn't create a gap in their day and they honestly could care less. And at this stage of life, zero feels heavier than it used to because you don't want to you don't want infinite beginnings anymore. You prefer to actually go back to one of your other beginnings. There's such a thing. You want stability. You want rootedness. You want someone who says, this is it. Not someone who hovers, not someone who tests, not someone who keeps options while enjoying your depth, not someone who says, that's a green flag, that's a red flag. And that's the part that makes this harder than honestly I want to admit. Because this wasn't some reckless fling. This wasn't shallow. This wasn't meaningless. There were real conversations about life, about love, about family, about if you had kids or your job and what your sister and your brother said and how your dad reacted, or maybe you used to talk to someone in their life who's not even around anymore in your life. And now you bring in a new person, they can't relate because they never met the person. You see, time. Yes, there was real conversations, real vulnerability, real physical intimacy, real bonding. And now I have to sit with the possibility that I was experiencing trajectory while they were just experiencing a chapter. And honestly, that is a humbling realization. There's also something else underneath this. It's the quiet awareness that I don't want to keep auditioning. I don't want to keep being the man who proves himself or explains why he broke up with his ex. Is the man who shows up, the man who overgives, the man who anticipates, the man who absorbs. At some point, you want to be chosen. without performance, without excuse. You want someone to see you and think, this is the one I'm anchoring to. Not, this is someone I enjoy while I explore. And maybe that's where the frustration has been building. Because I don't feel like I was casual. I don't feel like I was half in. And if I was fully in while she was still scanning, that imbalance is not just romantic. It says it's existential. It makes you question your calibration. It makes you question whether you read intensity correctly. It makes you question whether you attach too quickly or too deeply or too easily. But I don't think attaching deeply is a flaw. The flaw might be attaching deeply to someone who was attaching lightly and not seeing it when it was happening, or not seeing it for what it was, because you probably saw it happening and you just thought, you know, they'll love me in the future. You'll learn to love me. And the problem is, you don't always see the difference at first, especially when physical connection is strong. You see, guys, to be honest with you, sex blurs reality. That's why they say you should wait until you're married. It it just it just does. Physical closeness creates illusion of exclusivity, especially to those people who don't see it as something that it needs to be. And they think they can just option out, you know what I mean? And sadly, that physical closeness creates a false sense of forward motion. You see, like, you actually feel bonded, and there's science behind it. Yes, there is. You feel aligned and you feel chosen. But physical bonding without emotional anchoring is just unstable. And that's why there's many people out here who are unstable with many people. Yeah. You might get an unstable virus too. It feels solid in the moment, but evaporates in silence. And that evaporation is where the aging fear creeps in. Because you start asking yourself, how many more evaporations can I handle? How many more slow fades before I start protecting myself by withholding everything? And you don't want to be one of those people who withhold. That's the tension. I don't want to become cynical. I don't want to become the man who says all women are like this. I don't want to harden into bitterness, but I also don't want to keep being the one who feels it more every time. There is a quiet dignity in being able to love fully. But there is also a cost when that fullness isn't reciprocated. And that cost accumulates. It accumulates as doubt, it accumulates as hesitation, it accumulates as that small voice that says, don't lean too far this time. And I hate that voice, because leaning fully, get it, is who I am. And I'm not built for half connections, half love. I'm not built for casual orbiting. I'm not built for depth. Sorry, I'm built for depth, for presence, for partnership. And sitting here in this silence, I am confronting something uncomfortable. Being built for depth does not guarantee someone else is built the same way. And at this stage in life, compatibility is not just about chemistry, it's about direction. It's about whether two people are walking towards something solid or just walking beside each other. Because you can't really walk together with someone unless you both agree Yeah, I'm sure some of you heard that before. And if I'm honest, I think I was walking towards something and I am not sure what she was. And that's the difference. And that's why it feels heavier than betrayal. Because betrayal would at least confirm importance. Drifting confirms neutrality, and neutrality is harder to metabolize for whatever reason. There is also something else sitting underneath this, a quiet comparison to the past. Memories of being in relationships where I overcompensated, where I showed up consistently, where I carried weight, where I adjusted, where I endured. And I told myself those experiences were lessons, that the next time would be different, that the next time and the next connection would align. And when this one felt intense, it felt like proof. Proof that the lessons worked, proof that depth was mutual, proof that maybe this was the recalibration. And now I am sitting here wondering whether I simply walked into a familiar pattern wearing a new face. And that thought is heavy because it forces self examination. It forces me to ask whether I gravitate towards women who keep options open, whether I unconsciously pursue the dynamic where I have to prove myself, whether part of me feels most alive when I'm earning my way in a relationship. And that's not a comfortable question because it suggests I might be participating in the imbalance. Not maliciously, obviously, not intentionally, obviously, but structurally. And if that is true, then the work isn't just about her, right? Or them or him, right? It's about recalibrating myself. But I'm not at recalibration yet. I'm still in grief, still in the rawness, still in the place where the silence feels loud. And in that loud silence, you know, you start to scream, but terror takes the sound before you make it. Michael Jackson. I am confronting something else. If she never reaches out again, I will survive. But I will also remember this feeling, the feeling of realizing you are no longer central, the feeling of realizing you were meaningful but not permanent, the feeling of watching hope slowly lose oxygen. And maybe that's what hurts most. Not that she doesn't care at all, right? Not that he doesn't care at all, girls, but that they don't care at the level that you do. And that asymmetry is what forces me to finally say out loud, I'm single. Not technically, not ambitiously, not it's complicated, just straight up single. And knowing it. And that is sobering. There's a difference between being left and being easy to leave. Being left can happen in a conflict, in a betrayal, in chaos, like one of those cop videos on YouTube about Florida or Atlanta. You should check them out sometime. Being easy to leave is quieter, you see. It's when your absence doesn't disturb someone's rhythm. It's when days go by and nothing collapses. It's when you realize that while you were integrating someone into your future, they were integrating you into their options and slowly into their past. That realization does something to a man. I'm sure it does something to a woman as well. You see, not loudly, not theoretically, but internally. It makes you question your weight, and not on the scale, guys. Although, not your value, although maybe you don't make enough. Your weight. How heavy do I land in someone's life? Do I shift their center of gravity, or do I simply orbit until they find something more compelling? You know, kind of like the dude who has the girlfriend and he's an athlete and they're together from high school, and then probably midway through college, just when they start getting offers professionally, and and they get dumped or you get dumped just before they make it to the top of the company, or to the big leagues, or the professional leagues, or whatever, or become a full-fledged doctor, a lawyer, or engineer, principal. You see, that question is uncomfortable because it touches identity. I have always seen myself as solid, reliable, steady, capable. And my best ability was always availability. And guess what? That's right. The kind of man who shows up, the kind of man who builds, the kind of man who provides stability. But stability is not the same as urgency. Urgency is what creates attachment. You can be safe, you can be generous, you can be consistent, and still not be the one someone feels compelled to fight for. The one who, I'm busy, but I still contacted you anyway. Yeah. That's not an easy thing to admit, really, because part of me believes that being steady would eventually outweigh being shiny. That depth would outlast novelty. That loyalty would beat excitement. But sometimes it just doesn't. Sometimes excitement wins. Sometimes status wins. Sometimes money wins. Sometimes novelty wins. Sometimes a six pack wins. Sometimes 125 pounds wins, or 225 pounds. Sometimes simply new wins. Sometimes younger wins. And when you sit alone long enough, you start to wonder if you are simply built for maintenance while someone else gets built for passion. That thought really stings, I guess, because, like everybody else, I know what I bring, right? I know I am not average in how I care. I know I'm not shallow in how I attach or how I listen. I know I do not treat intimacy lightly. So when I am left in the silence, the mind starts scanning for explanations as to why. Am I too available? Am I too generous? Too forgiving? Too understanding? Or am I just not the one that flips the internal switch in someone? And if I'm not, right, can I accept that without turning it into an indictment on myself or of myself? This is where the fear of being fundamentally replaceable creeps in. Not because I'm insecure, but because evidence accumulates, right? Patterns accumulate. Moments where you leaned in, moments where you invested, moments where you showed up fully, and eventually you look back and say, why does this keep ending with me feeling more than the other person? You see, it's not self pity, it's data or data. And data or data forces introspection. But here's the deeper fear. The fear is not just that they moved on, the fear is that they move on easily, that they can shift attention, shift focus, desire easily while I'm still metabolizing what we had. That difference is processing speed. Feels like imbalance, and imbalance creates vulnerability because when someone moves faster than you emotionally, you feel exposed. You feel like you stayed longer than you should have. You feel like you believed harder than they did, and belief is costly when it's not matched. There is also something uniquely masculine, I guess, about this wound. Not really in a macho sense, but in a structural sense. Men are often taught to earn, right? Men are taught to provide. Men are taught to demonstrate and lead and prove and compete. And when proving does not result in permanence, it forces a deeper question. If I can't earn being chosen, then what determines it? And that question doesn't really have a satisfying formula. Logic. You can't spreadsheet your way into someone's heart. You can't overperform your way into being irreplaceable. You can't gift your way into emotional permanence. And yes, that is humbling, especially for someone who has always been capable. I have been capable in work, and capable in crisis, capable in support, capable in sacrifice. Sometimes not even when they knew, you know? But capability does not guarantee attachment, and that's the truth that strips away control. It leaves you standing with nothing but yourself. And that is where the identity shift begins. If I am not someone's priority, then who am I without the role of provider, fixer, giver, doer? Yeah. Who am I when I stop overextending? Who am I when I no longer lead with sacrifice? And that question is deeper than romance because I have built much of my adult identity on being the one who shows up, the one who absorbs, the one, who's steady and who steadies, the one who carries, lifts, pushes, pulls, shovels, mows, right? And a few other things that I didn't even normally do or thought I was supposed to do. And now I am sitting here realizing that showing up does not mean someone will actually stay. And that is, as I said before, destabilizing. It makes you want to withdraw. It makes you upset. It makes you hurt. It makes you angry at times. It makes you want to test. It makes you want revenge sometimes. It makes you want to say, fine, let's see how long this silence lasts. But even that impulse reveals something. It reveals that I still want to matter. Because if I truly did not care, I wouldn't track how many days it's been since I've heard from them. I wouldn't notice the gaps. I wouldn't replay conversations or reread them. I wouldn't analyze tone. Indifference is quiet. And this is not indifference. This is grief disguised as frustration. And underneath the frustration is sadness. And sadness that I allowed myself to believe this was anchoring. Sadness that I saw potential, or maybe there was only convenience. Sadness that I felt chosen in moments that may not have translated to future. And then there's the final layer. The one that is hardest to say out loud. The fear that maybe I am built for intensity, but not permanence. That I can create connection, create depth, create chemistry, but I can't create retention. And that thought is dangerous because if you start believing that narrative, you will carry it into every new interaction. And I don't want that. Who does? But I cannot ignore the pattern either, right? So here I am in the middle. Not broken, not really bitter, not collapsed, but exposed. Exposed to the reality that love is not guaranteed by effort, exposed to the reality that desire is not stabilized by generosity, exposed to the reality that someone can share your body and not anchor their future to you. That last one is the hardest because physical intimacy feels sacred to some of us. It feels like proof. It feels like crossing some sort of threshold, pardon the pun, I guess, if it is one. And when the threshold does not translate into commitment, it creates cognitive dissonance, as they say. You ask yourself, how could something that deep not mean more? But depth in the body does not always equal depth in intention. And that is a lesson I am still absorbing. Slowly, reluctantly, without resolution yet. But at the end of the day, the loneliness underneath it all. If this was only about her not texting, or him texting, or them texting, or whatever, it wouldn't hurt like this. If this was only about 6 days of silence, it wouldn't feel this heavy. What makes it heavy is what exposes. Because when I really sit with it, this isn't just about romance. Spoiler alert. It's about aloneness. The kind of aloneness that shows up at 2:45 in the morning when your body's in pain and there's no one there beside you. The kind where you quietly drive yourself to the hospital because you don't want to wake up anybody. Probably for fear also that if you did, they'd complain, which would just compound the pain that you're already feeling physically. You sit there in emergency, in physical pain, in a waiting room full of strangers who look at you with a blank stare and could care less. except for one old guy who offered Tylenol out of his pocket. And you realize something that has nothing to do with pride. You realize you do not have a person, not a backup, not an option, not someone hovering in orbit, a person to explain to the triage people what you need, what your history is. Someone who would insist on driving you, someone who would sit in the plastic chair next to you, someone who would say, I'm here. Don't worry, put your head on my shoulder. That realization, people, my friend, it's very sobering. Because I'm not a young man building my life from scratch. I'm not just entering adulthood. I've lived, I've loved, I've given, I've carried. And still, I sat there alone. And I didn't even question it, you know? And that's what makes it a little bit deeper. I didn't even consider calling anyone because somewhere inside of me, I already knew there wasn't anyone who would come. And that's not self-pity. That's just inventory, you know? And when you take inventory like that, something shifts. You stop blaming one woman. You start seeing the bigger picture. I've built myself into someone dependable, someone strong, someone capable, someone steady. You see, and oftentimes, guys, a strong man ends up sitting alone in their pain because they are the ones people lean on. They're not the ones people check on. They are the ones who drive others, who fix things, who carry things, who solve things. But when the strong one is down, there is often an awkward silence. For those of you who maybe watch various animal docs and seen lions and what happens to male lions at the end, probably get some inkling of what I'm trying to say. Because people are used to being upright, right? They're used to you doing everything, being strong. So when you sit in a hospital chair alone, you're not dealing with just, as I had, a pinched nerve, or have. You are confronting your support system, or lack thereof. And you realize over all of the years that you supposedly focused on your relationship and left all your would-be friends over here because she's my main focus and all that stuff. When she goes, who do you have? And that's where this cuts deeper, because the woman not texting is one layer. But underneath that is a harder admission. I do not have a romantic partner. I do not have close friends I can call at 3 a.m. in the morning. I do not have someone whose default instinct is to check up on me. And that is the real wound. The silence from her simply illuminated it. It amplified it. It made it undeniable. And when you realize that, the hurt expands. It's no longer just she didn't care. It becomes, who does? And that question is dangerous if you let it spiral. Because The mind will try to make it absolute. No one, nobody, never. But the truth is more precise. It's not that no one cares, it's that no one is anchored. And there is a difference. There are people who appreciate me, people who enjoy me, people who are glad that I exist. But appreciation is not anchoring. Enjoyment is not attachment. And really, you become a, dare I say, a non playable character in other people's lives. If you know what that is, it makes total sense to you. Enjoyment is not attachment. And that is the distinction that I'm sitting with. There is also something humbling about recognizing how much of my identity has been built around being needed. Needed at work, needed by partners, needed by people in crisis. Needed feels like value, but needed is not the same as love. And when the needs fade, sometimes the presence fades with it. The realization makes you question your own path and your own pattern. Have I been building connections around utility? Have I been positioning myself as indispensable instead of simply desired? Have I been leading with giving instead of allowing someone to choose me freely and give to me? Those are not easy questions. I know they sound easy because they implicate me. They suggest I may have equated generosity with security, that I may have believed that if I gave enough, showed up enough, sacrificed enough, someone would eventually say, "This is my person." But attachment does not form because of effort alone. It forms because two people independently decide that the other person matters enough to integrate deeply. And that decision cannot be forced. It cannot be purchased. It cannot be performed into existence. It must be mutual. And sitting alone that night, I realized something painful. If something happens to me, there wouldn't be a line of people disrupted. There wouldn't be someone pacing, someone frantic, someone panicking. And maybe that's good in a sense, except you kind of fade away. There would be concern, yes, and yes, I have kids, but not disruption. And disruption is what intimacy creates. True intimacy disrupts your rhythm when someone is missing. And I am realizing that I have not created that level of disruption in anyone recently. Not because I'm incapable, but because I have not been chosen at that depth, even when I thought I had been in past. And that, my friend, is lonely. Not dramatically lonely, not theoretically lonely, but quietly lonely. The kind that sits with you when the house is still. The kind that shows up when you finish cooking and no one says thank you. The kind that exists when you fix things, give things, provide things, and still go to bed alone. And here's the part that is hardest to admit sometimes. Part of me is tired. Not tired of loving, tired of carrying the emotional weight, tired of being the one who feels it first, feels it more, and feels it longer than I even want to. There's a subtle exhaustion in always being the emotionally available one in a dynamic that never solidifies. Because emotional availability without reciprocity feels like leakage. You pour, nothing pours back at the same rate. Sometimes nothing pours back at all. And eventually you notice the imbalance, and noticing it hurts because you start asking yourself whether the imbalance is a coincidence or a pattern. And if it's a pattern, then the work shifts back on you inward. Not to blame myself, but to understand why I keep entering dynamics where I invest deeply before confirming direction. Why I allow intensity to stand in for commitment. Why I give as if giving anchors. And maybe the answer is uncomfortable. Maybe part of me is trying to secure love through action. Maybe part of me learned early that being valuable keeps people from leaving. And if that is true, then this silence is not just romantic rejection. It's the collapse of a strategy. And that is disorienting, if that's all you know. Because if I cannot secure connection through giving, then I have to risk being chosen simply as I am, the sinful, wicked, cheating, lying human being that has come up short so many times. Just me. Without performance, without overextensionism, without sacrifice. And that is terrifying because that requires vulnerability without leverage of anything. No gifts, no fixing, no proving, just my presence. And presence might not be enough, or it might not be, it might be, who knows. But that uncertainty is what I am sitting with, and it's not comfortable. Hmm. And then we can talk about how hope just kind of leaves the room. You're in a room and all you have is hope, and then hope says, listen, there's a moment in every ending that is not dramatic. It doesn't slam the door, it doesn't scream, it doesn't even accuse. It simply exhales. And you realize something has changed. Hope has lost its grip. Not because you forced it out, but because it could no longer defend itself against actual reality. That is where I am. Not enraged, not vengeful, not bitter, just clearer. Clearer that I cannot make someone feel urgency. Clearer that I cannot manufacture someone missing me. Clearer that I cannot outgive someone's indifference. There is something strangely peaceful about that realization. Painful, but peaceful. Because it removes strategy. It removes the idea that if I just say the right thing, do the right thing, pull back at the right time, respond slower, maybe turn on my read receipts, turn them off, I don't know, appear busy, appear unbothered, disappear for a week, that any of that will generate authentic desire? I wonder. No, it won't. Desire is not a game of tactics and strategies. It's instinct, and instinct does not require prompting. If someone feels your absence, they move closer generally. If they don't, they don't. That sentence has finally landed. And landing does not mean that I like it, it means I accept it. There is also something humbling about admitting that I was holding on to possibility longer than the evidence supported it. Not because I'm delusional, but because I'm hopeful. Hopeful men can stay in gray zones longer than they should, like a Navy SEAL in the water. We interpret potential as trajectory, we interpret intensity as direction, we interpret physical closeness as emotional investment. And sometimes those things align and sometimes they don't. I am realizing that I was holding on to the memory of who she was when we were intense, not who she has been in silence lately. And that is a subtle, powerful, but powerful distinction. Because if I judge this dynamic by the peak, the past peak, I feel the loss. If I judge it by the present reality, I just feel misalignment. And misalignment is not a tragedy, it's simply information, or as I said earlier, data or data. It tells me something simple and hard. We were not moving at the same depth. We were not anchoring at the same level. And I cannot be the only one anchoring. It doesn't work that way. That creates drag, not partnership. There's another realization emerging quietly. If she reached out now, it will not change what the silence actually revealed. It doesn't just erase it. Even if she texts tomorrow, even if she says she was thinking about me, even if she says she missed me, the 6 days exists. And the 6 days told me something. It's 24 hours times six, y'all. Not a message. You might be sitting there saying, why didn't you message? Well, I'm the sick one. I'm the one away from the situation. I'm the one who needs help. I'm the one in pain. Maybe you understand, maybe you don't. I've decided whether I am willing to accept that as my position in someone's life. I have to decide. Not as punishment, not as revenge, not as pride, but just as a standard for my own life. Because here's the truth, and I can't avoid it. I don't want to be the man someone checks in on occasionally because someone else said something to them. And they said, oh, you know what? Let me check in and I'll get back to you. I don't want to, I want to be the man someone thinks about automatically. I don't want to be an afterthought. I don't want to be the safe emotional fallback. I want to be a chosen presence, and that requires mutual gravity. And that's not polite attachment. It's not seasonal intensity because it's not summer and they have no other place to be. It's not beach weather. Not situational intimacy. not proximity. So, therefore, you understand what I'm saying? Mutual gravity. And if I'm honest, I have not felt that in this dynamic at all, really, for a while, I guess, if I'm honest. I felt sparks, as the song said, Coldplay. I felt the heat. I felt the closeness. But gravity, as John Mayer said, it's different. Gravity pulls consistently. Gravity disrupts routine. Gravity makes absence uncomfortable. You could probably make a playlist out of this one. And the silence, words like silence break the, what's that? Breaks like, no, words like violence breaks the silence. I think that's Depeche Mode. Anyway, and the silence tells me gravity was not equal. There is something sobering about saying that out loud because once you say it, you can't take it back. It's been said, and you see what it is. And once you see it, hope shifts. Hope stops being about reunion and starts being about recalibration. And recalibration does not feel triumphant, it feels quiet. It feels like sitting in a room and saying, okay, that is actually what it is. Not what I want it to become, not what it felt like at its peak, but what it is. And what it is this. For those of you who might be confused, I cared more, I invested more, I stayed mentally longer. And that's not shameful, it's just asymmetry. And asymmetry cannot sustain long term connection. You can ride it for months, you can ride it for years, but eventually one person feels heavier. And when that person is you have a decision. You can keep leaning or you can stand upright. Standing upright does not mean withdrawing love. It means refusing to chase confirmation. It means refusing to interpret breadcrumbs as signals of love. It means refusing to manufacture meaning where there is none. And here's the hardest layer, the one that shifts identity. If I stop chasing and stop overgiving, if I stop positioning myself as the steady rescuer, who am I in the relationship? And that question is uncomfortable. And the reality is there actually a relationship at all? Because I have often been the initiator, the provider, the stabilizer. If I remove those roles, what actually remains besides presence, right? Just presence. And that presence is either enough or it isn't. That is the terrifying simplicity of it. Because presence cannot be negotiated. It can only be accepted, seen, and felt. And I'm starting to understand something that hurts, but frees at the same time. If someone does not feel compelled to protect access to you, then they are simply not aligned with you. And you cannot argue someone into alignment. You can't beg them into alignment. You can beg them, but that's not going to be alignment that you'll be left with. It'll be mercy drops. It'll be mercy. And it won't last forever either. Pity, you know? You cannot explain themselves that the person into urgency. You cannot gift them into attachment. You either land in their life with weight or you don't. And if you don't, the most dignified thing you can do is step back with without anything, spectacular. Not to punish, not to manipulate, but to preserve yourself. Because you've been a giver. Think about any animal, cat, dog, an elephant, a giraffe. They give and they give and they give and they give and they give when they have a child. And then at some point they step back. Now, in some of those animals in the world, they stay with the mother and they give back and they hunt and they feed the mother. And then others, they go about their business. The mother has served its purpose. The giver has served its purpose. It's protected, it's helped, it's lifted, it's nourished, it's taught. And then after a while, you outdo your usefulness. You outgrow or you're spent in that capacity. And the receiver moves on. And you need to step back to preserve yourself because the alternative is slow erosion. Slow erosion of confidence, slow erosion of self worth, slow erosion of hope. And I don't want to just erode. I've already lived enough life to know erosion is subtle. It doesn't break you in one moment, it wears you down small, slow. So here I am, not healed, not hardened, but clearer. Clearer that I cannot make someone miss me, clearer that I cannot compete with whatever else occupies their focus, clearer that I deserve someone whose instinct is to move towards me, not to hover near me, to see what shakes off of me so they can eat or get or feel protected or warm. And the most uncomfortable clarity of it all, really, I cannot, well, I guess I'm not in love with that. Or I'm in love with the version of myself that felt chosen by her. And that version of me is still possible, just not with someone who does not feel gravity for me. And that's where this lands. Not in victory and not in revenge, but in recognition. Recognition that sometimes the hardest part of being single is not being alone. It's accepting that you were never anchored the way you thought. And sitting with that truth without turning bitter, right? I'm not at the mountaintop yet. I'm just clearer, simple. And for now, I guess that's honest. Replaceable man. There is very specific there's a very specific humiliation in knowing someone can share your body, share your secrets, share your late night thoughts, share your vulnerability, and still move on without disruption. Doesn't explode, it doesn't create a scandal, it simply shifts, simply shifts. And that shift forces a man to confront something he does not want to say out loud. Was I special? Was I good? Or was I just available? That question is not ego, it's identity. Because intimacy feels like crossing a threshold, as I said earlier. It feels like exclusivity. It feels like a chosen territory. It feels like something sacred was exchanged. When someone desires you physically, when they initiate, when they bond, when they let you in, when they invite you into that space, it feels like confirmation. Confirmation that you matter. Confirmation that you are not just another face. Confirmation that something is moved beyond casual. And when that confirmation turns into temporary, something inside of you destabilizes. You begin questioning your read on everything. Did it mean as much as I thought? Did I project depth? Did I mistake chemistry for commitment? Because physical closeness feels undeniable. It feels real in a way that words simply do not have. And when something undeniable evaporates, your internal map glitches. You replay moments, you replay tone, you replay body language, you replay intensity, you replay videos, you look at pictures, you read over texts. You go back into your mind and replay situations, words, feelings, discussions, arguments, disagreements. You try to identify the point where the current changed. But here's the part that stings the most. Sometimes nothing changed. Sometimes you were simply moving forward while the other person was moving laterally or stopped or started moving backwards. You were integrating and they were experiencing. You were building narratives and they were enjoying a chapter or a page or a sentence. And that difference does not show up in the heat of the moment, it only shows up in the silence afterwards. That silence is where humiliation creeps in because humiliation is not always public. Sometimes it's deeply private. It is the quiet realization that while you were investing emotionally, the other person may have still been evaluating you. That while you were thinking future, they were thinking present. Their handout. That while you felt chosen, you were still optional, and optional is hard to swallow. Not because you lack confidence, but because you know your weight. You know what you bring, you know how you care, you know the depth you offer, and still the depth did not convert into permanence. So the mind does what the minds do. That makes sense. Your mind scans. Who is she talking to now? Who is he talking to now? Who are they dating now? What do they represent? Are they more exciting than me? More new? Better? More unpredictable? More socially valuable? Someone you could bring home to mom or dad? More presentable? More fit? More upwardly mobile? You tell yourself you don't care, but you do. Not because you want to compete with anybody, right? But because you want to understand. You want to know whether you lost something specific or whether you were simply not the long term candidate and you just didn't know it. Because there's a difference. Losing to better is easier to digest. Losing to different is harder, or losing to no one is even worse. Because different means you were not wrong, you were just not aligned. And alignment cannot be argued. It's just, it just is what it is. You cannot explain someone into urgency. You cannot negotiate yourself into permanence. You cannot overperform your way into gravity. That is the part that strips away control. And control has been a quiet comfort in my life, I would say. If I show up, if I provide, if I listen, if I give, if I stabilize, surely that creates anchoring. But love does not operate in receipts or on receipts. It does not tally sacrifices, sorry. It doesn't calculate generosity, nope. Cha-ching. It does not reward loyalty automatically. It responds to pull. And pull cannot be engineered. And that realization bruises pride. Because pride whispers, after everything I gave, after everything I offered, after everything I showed up with, but maturity interrupts pride and says, giving does not obligate someone to attach to you. And that is humbling. There is another fracture underneath this, though, the fracture between identity and outcome. I see myself as steady, capable, emotionally aware, emotionally willing, generous, present, with lots of effort. So why am I not kept? That question is dangerous because if you answer it carelessly, it becomes a narrative, a game. The wrong narrative becomes, I am not enough. But that is not the correct diagnosis. The correct diagnosis might be this: being a good person does not guarantee being a chosen person. Being stable does not guarantee being the compelling one. Being available does not guarantee being priority. And that is not an indication or an indictment on you. It's just reality. Sometimes you are not replaced by better, you are replaced by different. And different feels like rejection anyway, of course, because it reveals something uncomfortable. You were meaningful, but not decisive. You were valued, but not anchored. And sitting with that without collapsing into bitterness requires restraint, because bitterness would be way easier. Bitterness would say, women only chase status, or men only desire tens. Women only chase novelty. Women only chase excitement. The narrative protects ego, right? But it distorts the truth. The truth is more precise. She did not feel gravity as I felt it. And gravity cannot be forced. There is also something else that needs to be said. Sex created illusion of inevitability. Sex feels like progress to most of us. It feels like crossing a line you do not uncross easily. It feels binding because it is. Some people figure that out later. And when something binding turns out to be temporary, it destabilizes trust in your own perception. You start wondering whether you mistake intensity for direction, whether you bond faster than others, whether you attach deeper than others, whether your emotional weight lands heavier than theirs. And that's not weakness, that is awareness. But awareness can morph into self-doubt if you're not careful. And here's the final layer that hurts the most: the fear that you are built for intensity but not for permanence. That you can create sparks, you can create chemistry, create emotional closeness, but not retention. That fear is subtle. It hides behind humor. It hides behind resilience. It hides behind confidence, but it exists because patterns matter. And when you notice a pattern where you feel more, invest more, stay longer mentally, you begin asking yourself whether something is in your calibration that just needs to be adjusted. Not your depth, your pacing. Not your generosity, your boundaries. Not your heart, your alignment detection. Because here's what cl- clarity is revealing to you or to me. I don't want to be intense. I want to be anchored. I don't want sparks that fade. I want gravity that holds. And gravity is mutual. It is not created by one person leaning in harder and chasing. It's created by two people who feel the same pull. And if I did not feel equal pull from her, then what I experienced was asymmetry. And asymmetry cannot sustain long term partnership. It's too hard, it's too unpredictable. I mean, it can sustain excitement for sure, it can sustain intimacy, moments, sessions, nights. It can sustain conversation, but it can't sustain structure. And I want structure, not suffocation, not obsession, not dependency, structure. The kind where absence creates disruption, the kind where silence feels absolutely wrong, the kind where effort is just automatic. And if she did not feel that, then stepping back is not defeat, it's just preservation. Because the alternative is erosion, slow erosion of self worth, slow erosion of confidence, slow erosion of hope. And I've already lived life long enough to know erosion is quiet. It doesn't shatter you, it just wears you down, it finishes you. So, this is where I land. Not victorious, not destroyed, but clear. Clear that I cannot make someone care at my level. Clear that I cannot make you love me. Clear that I can't compete with novelty. Clear that I cannot turn generosity into gravity. Clear that I cannot make my I'm not going to say. I'm not going to make my financial status 5 times what it is overnight for sure. And without a lot of luck, not likely. Clear that I do not want to be optional. And here's the most honest sentence of all. I am not grieving her. I'm grieving the version of myself that I felt when I felt chosen. That version of me is still possible. That man who feels wanted, the man who feels anchored, the man who feels prioritized. That version is not dead. He was simply activated by the wrong gravity. And gravity either exists on both sides or it doesn't. You cannot simulate it. You cannot persuade it. You cannot earn it. You only feel it. And I want that. Not the spark, not the chapter, not the temporary intensity, gravity. If that means I sit alone for a while longer, well, I guess I'll sit. Maybe I get a dog. If that means I recalibrate my pacing, I'll recalibrate. If that means I stop over giving and stop over observing alignment first, then that is the adjustment. Not because I'm bitter, but because I'm learning. And learning does not always feel triumphant. Sometimes it feels like sitting in a quiet room. Sitting in my room. Acknowledging that You cared more, that you hoped longer, that you believed deeper, and decided you will not punish yourself for that. I am not on the mountaintop yet. I'm not healed. I'm not detached. I'm just clearer. And clarity is not loud, it is still. And that's where I am. And that's honest. Yeah, I've done episodes where I instruct on how to get to that mountaintop. But today, although with some satire, some parody, pulls from my life and pulls from my mind and my imagination and other people's lives and things that I've seen and learned. And it may not all be clear to you, but that's not the point. My story is not just that, some guy started dating someone and things kind of fell off and the relationship stayed and hung around. And then there was a point where there was this 60-day gap in the middle of relating, and the person didn't reach out knowing that you were sick, knowing that you were bedridden, knowing that you were in pain. And they didn't even contact you to say, hey, how are you doing? Are you feeling any better? They just ignored your existence and moved on with life. That is sobering. But life's not over. Not yet. So keep moving. Keep striving. Keep pushing. Maybe attach that available sign over your head. Maybe go and be in places where like minds can be joined. Like hearts. Like intentions. Like beliefs. Anyways, y'all, this is the end of this podcast, 312. You're probably right. I was going to end it after a certain point, but I figured, you know what, for continuity's sake, I would just make it one episode and hopefully it benefits someone out there. And if not, maybe it just gave you a few jokes. And if it gave you jokes, then I'm sure it still benefited you. Anyhow, until next time, this is MCM signing off. Please follow my podcast. I'm going to put the stuff on YouTube just because. It's already on there, some of it, but I kind of sparingly released episodes because it is audio only podcast thus far. I didn't really think YouTube factored in much, but I think I'm going to just open it up on my dedicated channel, not the channel that I used to so-called DJ on, because I think YouTube's done something to that channel. It's just sitting there in obscurity, even though there's so-called subscribers. But anyways, till next time, y'all. See ya. Hey, come check out You Probably Right podcast. Society is getting more unpredictable every day, but at the same time, predictable in its unpredictability. Say that 4 times real fast. Come with me as I attempt to find clarity in all the fog while staying way outside the box and kicking the box way down the road with my size 12 ducks. I use the Bible, experience, education, fortune, misfortune, life's lessons, life's mistakes to sort through all the mess. I talk about news, God, God, self-help, sports, sickness, health, music, parenting, love, humbleness, hurt, pain, joy, and all the things that might make you say, I never thought of it that way. Hopefully, anyway. Also, I take a stab at answering tough and not so tough questions, and all the while understand that, listen, Sometimes you end up in the hot seat and there's no thermostat. Well, that's how it is here. And because there's no topic, well, very few topics off the table, Torontonians will understand that Doug Ford reference there. Hopefully the podcast will be helpful and uplifting. And hey, maybe you'll find your own private Idaho here somewhere. Hope to see you soon.
Ooh, yeah. Listen. It's getting late and I'm still wide awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the space you take. One day you're here, next day you're gone, and I'm just trying to understand where we went wrong. You only love me in the middle of the night, yeah, the night. Then you fade away with the morning light. I need to know, is this for real? Tell me how you truly feel. Oh, yeah. I give my all, you give me half your heart. You say the words, but we just stay so far apart. These mixed signals are tearing me down, lost in the silence when you're not around. Tell me how you feel. How you really feel. Is any of this real? Just tell me, yeah. Tell me, baby. Oh. You only love me in the middle of the night, yeah, the night. Then you fade away with the morning light. I need to know, is this for real? Tell me how you truly feel.